Part 3, Conquest, Chapter 5. You surprise me, he said. I didn't think you'd make it. He noticed the wiffle bird in Tom's arm. What's the matter with her? Ben said. She's hurt. She tried to save us, and the Giascutus knocked her down. The proc looked dreadfully concerned and took a step forward. Tom clutched the bird protectively. Come along, boy, the proc snapped. Give the wiffle bird to me. Not on your life, you big bully, Tom whispered fiercely. Oh, this is really too much. The proc stamped a long, thin foot in annoyance. Do you realize the trouble you have caused? This is all your fault, the first accident we've had in the kingdom for a century. If you hadn't been here, none of this would have happened. You're an absolute menace. Tom was so angry that he yelled at the towering proc. Our fault, is it? Well, that's a stupid remark. Who sent that monster out there to attack us? Who tipped off the gazooks and then the sidewinders, the swamp gaboons? Who arranged to have Lindy captured by the Splinter Cat? It is all your fault. The boy choked with emotion as he looked down at the feathered bundle lying so still in his arms. If she doesn't get better, if she dies, I'll never forgive you. Never. The Brock looked at Tom intently. Then he said in a quieter voice, I suggest you give the bird to me. We know how to take care of her. She'll be all right, I promise you. Tom hesitated. Ben said, Do as he says, Tom. The proc clapped his hands together. Guard, he called. A large sidewinder came trundling around the corner. It looked very startled at the sight of the children. Lindy gave a squeal of fear. You will not be harmed, the proc reassured her. He took the wiffle bird from Tom. She was whimpering with genuine pain and sounded very different from the brave bird who had pretended such agony in front of the Splinter Cat. You're sure she'll be all right? The boy asked anxiously. You know, she was trying to save me when she got hurt. He touched her gently in farewell. We will do our best, the proc replied gravely. He handed the bird to the sidewinder, who walked quickly away. Now tell me about your friend, the professor, the proc said. Why is he not with you? He just couldn't get here, Lindy answered. He was so tired he couldn't see the bridge. It was too much for him, explained Ben. He would have been all right if it hadn't been for all the things you put in our way. He hasn't really been feeling well since we jumped off the brain strain, growled Tom. That's when it started. He told us to come on by ourselves, Lindy said. He said he was sure the Whangdoodle would understand and would see us. I see. The proc looked thoughtful, and there seemed to be a trace of disappointment in his voice. Then his expression changed, and he said briskly, Well, I'm sorry, but this is the end of your journey. I can tell you now that the Whangdoodle will not receive you. You might just as well turn around, find your professor, and go home. Oh, don't say that, Ben cried desperately. Tom said, We promised the professor that we would speak to the Whangdoodle. I've got to give him his regards, added Lindy tearfully. There's nothing I can do, said the proc firmly, and he began to usher them towards the gates. The children hung back. Tom had never felt so depressed. I want to wait and see if the wiffle bird is going to be all right. Huge tears rolled down Lindy's face. We've worked so hard, and I just can't end like this. There's nothing we can do. You can do? The proc was shaking his head. I'm afraid not. You see? But he didn't finish, for the sob of Lindy rushed to his side and flung her arms around him. Oh, please, please, she begged, and buried her face in the thick, baggy sweater. She wept as if her heart would break. She wept as if her heart would break. The proc knelt beside her. He was distinctly uncomfortable. Now, Miss Lindy, you mustn't cry. I can't stand to see people cry. Lindy's hand stole up around his neck, and she clung to him tightly. He was red in the face and covered with confusion. Ben and Tom looked at each other. It's okay, Lindy, Ben said gently. I guess it'll have to be like the professor says. Every once in a while, people fail in spite of trying. He'll understand. But I don't understand, she wailed. At home, if somebody tried hard and really, really wanted to see the president, then they could. She gazed imploringly at the Proc. Dear Proc, couldn't you just this once forget about being in charge and that sort of thing? Couldn't you speak to the Whangdoodle for us? I want to see him more than anything in the whole world. The Proc hesitated. He looked at the boys and looked back at Lindy. He touched her tear-stained face. Oh, you human beings, he said with feelings. When will I ever learn? He rubbed Lindy's cheeks with the sleeve of his sweater. Come along. I can see there's only one way to get any peace around here, and that's to let you meet the Whangdoodle. Lindy hugged him with all her strength. Tom and Ben could not believe the sudden turn of events. All right, the Proc waved away their thanks. Taking Lindy's hand, he said, Come along, Miss Lindy, but for pity's sakes, try not to cry any more. It gets me all emotional, and I start to itch. He led them across the courtyard and under another archway, past 2 sentry sidewinders standing rigidly at attention. The children gave them a wide berth. The palace was more beautiful than they had ever imagined. There were crystal courtyards with bright mosaic floors. Others were grassy with wildflower borders and contained sparkle fountains or tranquil pools with ambrosia blossoms floating on the milk-white water. The trees were magnificent, and there were flowers such as the children had never seen before. Flutterbys were everywhere. There was a cool breeze, and the scent of honeysuckle was strong and heady. Wind chimes made sweet music. The Proc walked quickly down a long vaulted passageway and paused in front of the wrought silver door. Wait for me here, he said, and went inside. Ben, Tom, Lindy looked at each other, their hearts pounding with excitement. The boys straightened their hair, and Lindy smoothed the wrinkles out of her clothes. She said longingly, I wish the professor were here. We must remember every detail for him, Ben declared solemnly. The silver door opened and the Proc emerged. You may come in now, he said quietly. When you meet the Whangdoodle, you must address him as Your Majesty. Don't talk too much and don't get bouncy with excitement because the Whangdoodle seldom has company and is not used to it. Remove your hats and give them to me. Always go bareheaded in front of royalty. It shows respect. The children took off their scrappy caps and gave them to the Proc. He held open the door. As they walked past him, he announced in a clear voice, The Potter children, Your Majesty, Benjamin, Thomas, and Melinda. He closed the door behind them. They were in a cool, high-ceilinged room. It was white with tall windows through which the sunlight fell onto a polished marble floor. The room was sparsely furnished. There was a long table bearing some choice pieces of silver and a large, richly covered chair, which was framed by a beautiful tapestry that hung on the wall behind it. There was no one in the room. The children waited. The silence lengthened. Tom coughed, and a hollow echo came from the high ceiling. Quiet, suddenly, a cheerful voice said, Well, I must say, you humans have changed a bit since the old days. The children jumped with alarm and found themselves witnessing an amazing sight. 2 eyes and a very large pair of antlers began to materialize from the tapestry, followed by the moose-like head that bore them. Next came 4 rather short legs attached to a round, barrel-like body. The children watched in wonder as the Whangdoodle crossed to his throne and sat down nonchalantly, folding his front legs across his chest and crossing one back leg over the other. Don't look surprised. His voice was deep, and he spoke with an engaging lisp. I was playing it safe. Didn't want you to see me before I'd had a peek at you, so I changed myself into the colors of the tapestry. The Whangdoodle was truly an extraordinary creature. He was the size of a small pony. His face was big and friendly with large brown eyes and long fair eyelashes. His eyebrows were arched, giving him a constant look of surprise. His muzzle looked soft as velvet, and when he grinned, he displayed strong horse-like teeth, which protruded over his lips. His antlers were amazingly large and very handsome. He held his head proudly, in keeping with his generally regal air. His body was a warm gray-brown color, and his small, rather thin tail was fashioned into a love knot. On his hind feet, he wore a pair of old pink knitted bedroom slippers with floppy tassels. Ben remembered the Proc's instructions. Your Majesty, thank you for allowing us to see you. The Proc tells me you've been giving him a lot of trouble. I didn't want to see you, not at first. Then I confess that I did feel some slight desire to make contact again after all these years. I do get lonely. Not that I mind, and I wouldn't go back, not ever, even if you begged and pleaded. Humans can't be trusted. Have a piece of watch. He held out a large box of candy. The children hesitated. Come on, you must be starving. I'm sure you haven't eaten for ages. They hungrily accepted the delicious sweets. Aren't they good? The Whangdoodle munched one happily. This is my favorite kind. I am a very sweet tooth, you know. Would you like to see it? He asked Lindy. Oh, yes, thank you, Your Majesty. The Whangdoodle grinned. It's this one here, he said, indicating it with his tongue. See the little daisy on it? Why, that is a sweet tooth, Lindy said in surprise. Thought you'd like it. All Whangdoodles are born with one, you know. A shadow passed over his brow. At least they used to be, he added sadly. He helped himself to another piece of watch. As I was saying, you look different from the children I used to know. Cleaner, neater, taller. Are you an exception, or do all children look like you? Tom answered, I don't think we're different from other children, Your Majesty. How is your world these days? The Brock never tells me anything because he doesn't want to upset me. Do you still use the barbaric rack and boiling oil on your enemies? Do you still fight over territory and so on? We still have wars, Your Majesty, if that's what you mean, replied Ben. The Whangdoodle looked depressed. Thought so. It didn't seem as though things were going to change much when I left. He began to turn blue. Lindy said, Your Majesty, you're changing colors. Am I? He looked at his stomach. So I am. I do it without thinking, you know. Can you really turn any color you want, asked Ben. Yes, I can turn plaid if I want to, but that's a hard one. What's the hardest color of all to do? Lindy inquired. Oh, I would say flange. What's flange? Tom chuckled. It's nothing to laugh about, young man. It's every color of the rainbow all at once. I seldom manage that one. Mind you, omnipresent blue is pretty, though, as well, and crash pink. Is that pretty? Asked Lindy. It's stunning, absolutely stunning, replied the Whangdoodle. Harder than plaid? Oh, 10 times harder. Or is it 11? Lilac is my favorite color, Lindy told him. Is it now? Well, allow me the honor. The Whangdoodle slowly turned the most beautiful shade of lilac that Lindy had ever seen. That's lovely. Thank you, Your Majesty. Not at all. Have some watch. The Whangdoodle suddenly winced. Oh, dear, my poor feet. I know it's rather informal, but would you mind if I put them up for a while? I'm due for a new pair of slippers. You see, right now, my feet are just killing me. Ben said, Oh, don't worry about us, Your Majesty. Is there anything we can do for you? You could pass me the footstool over there. Ben fetched it and placed it in front of the throne. Oh, that's better. The Whangdoodle stretched his legs and smiled with relief. Now explain something to me. I was told that there were 4 of you in the expeditionary party, that your guide was the professor, somebody or other. He's been so poking around the country a lot. Why isn't he here? Taking turns, the children told the Whangdoodle all about the professor, from the day they had met him at the zoo to their sad parting at the bridge. The Whangdoodle looked thoughtful. Well, I must say, it's a pity your friend couldn't make it. I hoped I might get a moment to chat with him. I fancy we'd have a lot in common, and good conversation is hard to come by these days. It's very quiet here, you know, and I don't have a wife. Sad that. I don't have anyone to carry on my family name. Makes me very blue sometimes. Pale blue. He changed back to the appropriate color. Lindy said, You'd like the professor, Your Majesty. He's the nicest person in the whole world next to Mummy and Daddy. Is there any way you could help him get here? He wants to meet you so very badly. Oh, I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do. He had exactly the same chances as you. You saw the bridge. He didn't. I can't provide him with a new imagination, can I? I'm not sure he did have the same chance, Tom said. Remember, he had to outguess and outsmart every creature in the land to help us. He gave so much of himself. It's no wonder he couldn't concentrate at the end. Yes, I understand that. I admire the fellow. The Whangdoodle nodded solemnly. Ben had a sudden inspiration. How about you come back with us across the bridge? You can meet the professor that way. The Whangdoodle shook his head. Impossible. Your friend can't see the bridge, then I doubt he'd be able to see me. That's simple, undeniable fact. There was a moment's silence in the beautiful white room. Then Lindy said in her clear, practical voice, You know, the really sad thing about all this is that the professor could have come here. He probably would have made you another Whangdoodle. The Whangdoodle looked at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Then he carefully said, Would you mind explaining that last statement, young lady? Well, you see, he's a professor of genetics. You know, he can make life. He told us he could. She gave a matter-of-fact wave of her hand. If he can make life, he can make a Whangdoodle, wouldn't you say? The Whangdoodle looked at the boys. Is she talking sense? He did tell us that the secret of life had been discovered, Your Majesty, said Ben. He told us that he had great responsibility on our hands, added Tom. I would say so, replied the Whangdoodle, raising his eyebrows. He looked stunned. Well. What an incredible fellow your professor must be. It is indeed a shame that we could not meet. Lindy said, He could be rested by now. If we help him, he might just make it across the bridge. It really doesn't seem right to be here without him, remarked Tom. The Whangdoodle suddenly straightened in his chair. Prock! He yelled and clapped his front hooves together. The Prock entered the room. Your Majesty. Come here, fellow. Something rather interesting has come up. Excuse me, Potters, just for a moment. The Whangdoodle got up and limped with the Prock to one of the tall windows where they stood in a quiet, close conversation. Lindy tugged at Ben's sleeve. What do you suppose is going to happen? She whispered. I don't know. Wouldn't it be great if the professor could somehow get here after all? Oh, gosh, my stomach just went all funny. Mine, too, said Tom. The Whangdoodle clapped the Prock on the back and turned to the children. We have decided that it will be good if you try to help your friend across the bridge, but only one may go. The Prock said, I advised His Majesty that it would be safer if only one was allowed out of the palace gates. If all three of you went, there would be no guarantee that you would bring the professor back. But of course we tried to bring him back. That's the whole point, isn't it? Said Ben. I'm not sure, the Prock replied. What if he does not make it in spite of your help? What if he chooses not to come? It is possible. No, I think he'd be more inclined to try to reach the palace if he knew that two of you were here and being held hostage. Hostage? Ben was horrified. You can't hold us hostage. You can't keep us here against our will. Well, I'm hoping it won't come to that. I'd rather thought you'd see the sense of this, replied the Prock. Tom said, We can leave any time you want. All we have to do is turn around and go home. The Prock smiled. I'm afraid you're wrong there. You see, I have your hats. There's no going home without them. The children gasped and remembered too late the professor's warning about taking off their scrappy caps. There was a moment's silence. Tom growled, I might have guessed you'd be up to some double-crossing trick. The Whangdoodle interrupted brightly. Oh, now let's not get in a tizzy. There hasn't been a tizzy around here in years. Have some more wodge, and let's discuss this in a civilized manner. Prock, you silly old thing, you do lay it on a bit thick sometimes. This all seems very simple. He looked at the children. You want your professor to meet me. I'm most anxious to meet him. The surest way to get him here is to two of you to remain and one of you to go, and that's all there is to it. Now, which one of you will it be? Lindy turned to Ben. Ben glanced quickly at Tom. The Prock leaned across the throne and whispered, Might I suggest the little girl, sire? Really? The Whangdoodle looked surprised. She seems to have the brightest imagination, Your Majesty. Oh, of course. He nodded in comprehension. Ben stepped forward. We think Lindy should go, Your Majesty. Very sensible. The Whangdoodle was pleased. Proc, escort the young lady to the bridge, will you? Hey, wait a minute, Lindy protested. I can't cross that bridge all by myself. What if that awful bird comes back to get me? The Whangdoodle reassured her. I give you my solemn promise the Giascutus will not bother you. She turned to the boys. Do I have to do this? Must it be me? Lindy, if anyone can convince the professor to cross that bridge, it's you. He'll listen to you. Ben placed his hands on her shoulder and looked at her solemnly. Think how important this is for the professor. Remember all that he has done for us. Can you be brave and do this for him? Tom said, Remember Halloween, Lindy? You were terrific then. Crossing a bridge is nothing compared to all the things we've been through lately, added Ben. Lindy thought about it. Oh, rats, she said in a resigned tone. But I'll need my scrappy cap. I can't go without my scrappy cap. The Whangdoodle nudged the proc. Get her scrappy cap. Your Majesty, is that wise? The professor might just send her on home. The hats are the secret, you see. That's what helped them get here. Yes, and if they hadn't come here, we'd never have heard of this remarkable discovery. It's a risk we have to take. Give her the scrappy cap, silly. The proc reached into his pocket and produced Lindy's bonnet. She put it on. The Whangdoodle rose from his chair. Miss Potter, I cannot begin to impress on you the importance of this mission. If you can help your friend to cross the bridge and return to the palace, you'll be doing both me and my country a vital service. His coming here could be the most significant thing to happen to us in a long, long time. He produced a beautiful gold ring. Take this ring with you and show it to your professor. It may help. Lindy gulped. Goodbye, everyone. She reached for the proc's hand. They walked together through the courtyards and the gardens back to the bronze gates. The proc swung them open wide. Lindy's heart sank as she gazed out at the long silk span that stretched in front of her. It seemed a tremendous distance to the other side. I wish I didn't have to do this, she said in a small voice. The proc was surprisingly gentle. I will stand here and wait for you. There is no need to be afraid. You couldn't come with me. I'm afraid not. I don't think the professor would be able to concentrate if I were around. Okay, well, here I go. Lindy took a deep breath, grasped the silk handrails firmly, and began to walk. Part 3, Conquest, Chapter 6. The moment she was out on the bridge, she wanted to turn around and run back to the proc. There was a cool breeze blowing, and the bridge was swaying. She could see between the wooden slats to the foaming, rushing river thousands of feet below. The noise of the waterfall was terrifying. She looked back. The proc raised his arm. Go on, Miss Lindy. Once you get started, it doesn't seem so bad. Just make it halfway. From there, it's easy. Lindy walked on and tried to keep her head up. It was better if she did not look down. She thought of her brothers and wondered what they would do while she was gone. She remembered how sad the Whangdoodle had looked when he talked about being lonely, and how important he had made her feel when he asked her to try to bring the professor back. She clutched the gold ring he had given her and quickened her pace. She looked for the professor, but he was nowhere in sight. Professor! Professor! Her voice echoed from the chasm. Professor! She cried louder, but there was no reply. Lindy ran the remaining length of the bridge. Looking around, she remembered the dreadful Giascutus and hoped fervently that the Whangdoodle would keep his promise. Professor, where are you? She noticed a bright clump of yellow flowers in the ground ahead of her. As she watched, they moved slightly. With a jolt of happiness, Lindy realized that they were not flowers at all, but the yellow butterflies on the professor's open umbrella. Hello! Hello! His head appeared over the rim. He looked startled. Lindy, good gracious, what are you doing here all by yourself? Oh, Professor! She ran to him and flung her arms around his neck. I thought maybe you'd gone back without us or something. But I told you I'd wait for you. Why were you under the umbrella? Ah, well, if you recall, I was fighting with a Giascutus when you left. The wretched creature knocked me out. When I came to, the monster had disappeared. I didn't want to take the chance of his coming back and finding me, so I camouflaged myself with the umbrella. Thought he'd mistake it for a bunch of flowers. That's what I thought it was, Lindy said with a smile. Now, what's been happening and where are the boys? Did you see the Whangdoodle? Oh, golly. She sprang to her feet and began to pull out of sleep. Come on, Professor. You've got to come with me. It's terribly important. The Whangdoodle wants to see you. What? He sent me to get you. The boys are still in the palace. We can't get home because the proc has their scrappy caps. So you've got to come and tell him to let us go. She urged him towards the bridge. Wait a minute, Lindy. I can't cross the bridge. I told you I couldn't. But you've got to. I came all this way to find you and bring you back. You just have to get across. The Whangdoodle is waiting to talk to you. Why would he want to see me? The professor was puzzled. I don't know. He seemed really serious about it. Look, he sent you this ring. The professor turned the ring over and over in his hand. Amazing, just amazing. He looked with desperate longing across the chasm to the glittering palace. Lindy suddenly knew that she had to be firm. Take my hand, Professor, and come with me. I can't, Lindy. I would give my soul to come with you, but if I can't see the bridge, what can I do? You can see the Whangdoodle's ring, can't you? She cried. Yes. Well, that proves that the Whangdoodle is waiting for you. It proves that there really is a bridge, too, because how could I bring the ring to you otherwise? All you have to do is trust me. The bridge is there, I promise. You only have to walk across. But I don't see it. Then don't look. Keep your eyes on me. Hold my hand and don't look down, whatever you do. He hesitated and she gave a small cry of frustration. She pulled him towards the edge of the chasm and began talking, saying the first things that came into her head. It's such a little way across, really it is. Just make it halfway and the rest is easy. Oh, Professor, wait until you see the inside of the palace. You won't believe how beautiful it is. It's shining and cool and peaceful. There's a room for everybody in the whole world, but it isn't at all a lonely place. Keep looking at me, Professor. Hold my hand tighter. She walked slowly onto the silk bridge, and the professor took a deep breath and followed, never taking his eyes from Lindy's face. You'll see the most beautiful gardens with such flowers and mountains. The trees are mostly bright blue, but the undersides of all the leaves have a different color. Some are emerald green, some are white, and some are pale. You'll see there's music about the place all the time, a lovely sound that makes you feel calm and happy. There are flutterbys and pretty flags flying in the breeze. Lindy gave a quick glance behind her. They were halfway across the bridge. You're going to love the Whangdoodle. You're absolutely right about him. He's the best creature you could ever meet. He's funny and nice, but he's lonely. I think he misses our world and would like to come back. Only he says he never would. He has the dearest, sweetest tooth. He says you must be a very clever man, and I told him that you were and that you knew all about life and everything. Lindy. The professor hesitated. Don't stop now, she said in a clear voice. We're almost there. Only a few steps more and you'll be off the bridge. Count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you are, Professor. You've made it. I told you it could be done. Here's the proc. He'll lead you down for the way on. Lindy let go of the professor's hand and stepped back. She was trembling from head to foot. The professor looked around, dazed and bewildered. He looked at the proc, looked at Lindy, looking up at the shining turrets of the palace etched against the clear red sky. When he spoke, his voice was husky and his eyes were brimming. It is every bit as wonderful as you said. Oh, dear, oh, dear. Lindy was as happy and proud as she had ever been in her life. The proc led the way into the palace. So you're the one who's been causing all the fuss. The Whangdoodle stared at the professor. In all my years, I don't think I've ever come across such a persistent, persevering man. You've been a nuisance, but you are welcome. The professor gazed rapturously at the Whangdoodle, and then he sank to his knees. Your Majesty, this is a tremendous pleasure. Yes. Well, get up. There is much to talk about. You want some wodge? No, thank you, sire. You have 3 staunch supporters, I must say. The Whangdoodle waved a hoof towards Ben, Tommy, and Lindy. You trained them well, very well, but for them, you might not be here. And vice versa, Tom interrupted loyally. The professor smiled. I consider myself a lucky man in every respect. The Whangdoodle bounced in his chair. Yes, yes. I'm glad you crossed the bridge. I look forward to some splendid talks. I cannot tell you how much I have missed the stimulus of human company. Later we will celebrate. But now I have a favor to ask you, a great favor. I will do anything, Your Majesty, the professor said, smiling. Splendid, splendid. The children have been telling me about your wonderful discovery concerning the secret of life. Oh, have they? The professor looked at them in bewilderment. They know very little bit about it, sire. Well, no matter. The point is, I want you to make me another Whangdoodle. I beg your pardon? That's the favor I want. I want you to make me a Whangdoodle for me. Now, I know you're saying to yourself, what kind of Whangdoodle? Well, obviously, I want a female Whangdoodle. The Whangdoodle jumped up and paced about the room, changing color rapidly. You see, it's been so quiet and lonely here all these years. Then 4 human beings arrive on my doorstep, which is sensational enough. And then I learned that you are a professor with an incredible discovery, and I suddenly realized that all my dreams might possibly come true. He paused in front of the professor. I would have a family, and I would be extinct. I would never be lonely again. And I wouldn't be extinct, and I would never be lonely again. You don't understand how desperately important this is to me, don't you? Oh, sire, the professor lifted a hand to his brow. I am afraid there has been a terrible misunderstanding. I would give anything to be able to grant you your wish and make you a Whangdoodle, but it is impossible. I would not know how to begin. Tom said, but you told us the secret of life had been discovered, Professor. Yes, yes, you did, lisped the Whangdoodle emphatically. But discovering the secret of life and being able to make it work are 2 entirely different things. It will be a long time before man is ready to take the next tremendous step. We'll be the first. Start a fashion. The Whangdoodle waved his arms excitedly. Lindy ran to the professor. I remember you said that in a very little while, people like you would be able to make life. There you are, cried the Whangdoodle triumphantly. If you said that, you must have a great deal of knowledge. Go on, Professor. I bet you could do it, encouraged Ben. No, no, no. Listen to me, the professor pleaded. They all started to speak it to him at once. The noise was deafening. Just a minute, shouted the Whangdoodle. He stamped his foot and winced with pain. He turned to the professor and said, I want some questions answered. A simply yes or no will suffice. You admit that the secret of life has been discovered? Yes, Your Majesty. If it has been discovered, I assume you know what makes life. Yes, Your Majesty, but if you know what makes it, you know how to make it. Well, listen to me. There must have been a number of experiments. Yes, sire, there are many things being tried. There is something called cloning, and then there's microdissection and implantation. Have you been present at these experiments? Most of them, Your Majesty. We've had some amazing success with frogs. The Whangdoodle glowed pink with delight. Well, then, this is all very clear to me. I don't see what all the fuss is about. If you haven't been smart enough to find the secret of life and it works on a frog, for heaven's sakes, why not a Whangdoodle? I am a willing subject for research. All you have to do is get your thinking organized, and I'm certain you'll come up with the solution. The professor gave an exasperated sigh. Your Majesty, how can I convince you that you are asking for the impossible? I hate to disappoint you, but the work in genetics is really just the beginning. I've devoted most of my life to research, and yet I only have a few answers. How can I possibly know enough to create a Whangdoodle? The Whangdoodle stared at the professor and slowly turned a very pale blue. He looked terribly dejected and slumped back to his throne. After a moment, he said, Bother, I was very sad. I had such high hopes. I was so certain that your presence here meant that something special was going to happen. I must have been wrong. It's too disappointing for words. The Proc said gently, Your Majesty. No, the Whangdoodle held up a hoof. I'd rather not discuss it anymore. I think I'd like to be myself for a while. He got up and walked towards the tapestry. As he did so, he began to disappear until only his eyes and antlers remained. Eventually, they also vanished. His voice was the last thing to go. It's really depressing. I never wanted anything so much in my whole life. Silly of me to suppose it might be possible. A large, shiny tear rolled down the tapestry. There was a long silence in the room after he had gone. Lindy said, "That's awful, Professor. He was crying." "What a shame," Tom said with feeling. "I wish we could have done something." "I cannot make a Whangdoodle," the professor stated. The proc cleared his throat. He spoke slowly and obviously having difficulty in saying what he felt. "Couldn't you just try?" "His Majesty wants another Whangdoodle more than anything else in the world. You know how he feels. You wanted to get to the Whangdoodle land more than anything in the world. The king was gracious enough to meet with you. Won't you return the favor and try this for him?" The children had never heard the park speak with such feelings. The professor shut his eyes. "I would love to help. I don't like to see the Whangdoodle upset any more than you do, but I can't see how it's possible." Lindy interrupted. "You know what, Professor? Ever since we met, you've been saying to us, you can, you can, you can. But lately, all I ever heard is from you is, I can't, I can't, I can't." Ben said quickly, "You said once that whatever man can imagine, he can do." Lindy clapped her hands. "You said that you couldn't cross the bridge, but you did." "Oh, Professor," cried Tom, "give it a chance. How do you know you can't make a Whangdoodle until you've tried?" The children clustered around him. The proc said, "Professor, I know you are a man of great strength. When you choose to believe in something, you are unshakable. Won't you believe now that experiment is possible?" The professor looked at the four of them, 4 pairs of eyes staring at him, unblinking, waiting for his reply. He mumbled, "I would need equipment. It's liable to take a long time." "Tell me what you need," said the proc. "I will see that you get it." The professor held his forehead in concentration. "I would need a dissecting microscope, possibly a laser beam, ultrafine dissecting equipment, saline solution, flask, culture tubes." His words were drowned by their cheers that came from the children. They danced around the professor, hugging him, patting him, kissing him, laughing with happiness. Even the proc smiled broadly.